You are listening to the Firefighters BattleSpace podcast.
All right. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Bill Brower again. I'm here with Chief Dunn. You're listening to the Firefighters BattleSpace podcast with Chief Vinny Dunn. And tonight we're going to talk about one of the most, what I feel is one of the most defining moments in the fire service. And Chief, I know you'll touch on this as one of the greatest impacts of your career, which is the 23rd Street Wonder Drugstore fire and the collapse that killed 12 New York City firefighters on the night of October 17th in 1966. As you can see in the background here, that's a shot of the Wonder Drugstore fire on the corner there. Chief, it's a fire that you've been talking about for quite a while. It's something that you've brought up in your latest book, My War Years, a Fire Chief's Memoir, and you touched on some things about how it took you, a number of years to really kind of wrap your head around this fire and be able to put into words what this fire was and how everything went that night. First off, thank you again for joining me to talk about this topic and talk about this fire. What I wanted to start out with was this tragedy the impetus behind your research, writing, and publishing career? How great of an impact did this have behind your research and writing career?
Well, it had great impact. I mean, it was my defining fire. Once in a while we talk about what is your defining fire. Some guys have the telephone company as their defining fire. Some guys, I'm sure everybody has the World Trade Center as their defining fire now. But in my case, it was this 23rd Street fire. It was my defining fire. However, when I had that fire, I, worked there that night, and in the daytime, in the afternoon, when we retrieved all those bodies, I went home. I jumped into bed. My 2-year-old daughter jumps into bed with me, and she cuddles up with me, and I think there's a lot of kids not going to have dads to cuddle up to. And I fell asleep. I woke up the next day, and I went, did my thing. I went back to work. I went to the funerals, but I was 31 years old. Mm-hmm. I wasn't into introspection, and I went on. I didn't think about that fire. At least I'm saying to myself, consciously, I didn't think about that fire. So I was a lieutenant. I was on the captain's list. I wanted to become a chief. So I went on, and I didn't really think it was affecting me. However, 12 years later, I'm a division chief up in the Bronx, and I'm saying, wow, I'm responsible for all these guys. And I see the buildings up there were collapsing. They were abandoned, vacant. And it was, the war years, 77. And it was like the bombed out areas of Germany. I'm saying, whoa, so now this fire, I imagine, came back to me. Mm-hmm. And when I started writing my first article in 1978, the Parapet Wall collapsed. And then when I started writing for Dennis Smith's magazine, Firehouse magazine, predicting building collapse, which I tell you can't do, and then there were so many articles about building collapse. And the editor said to me, Vin, you got to stop writing about building collapse. And I said, I can't, I got to keep this going. He was good enough to let me continue, and I told my wife, I don't know where this is coming from, but I said, I feel like I'm vomiting this stuff out. Yeah. My words are vomiting out of my mouth on stuff. But every time I go to a firehouse, I sit down with guys in the kitchen. This is now we're going back to 1977. I wrote my book was published in 88. I would sit down with any firehouse in the Bronx. I say, did you ever have a collapse? Yeah, I was in an alley one time and a wall blew out on us. Just good thing we weren't standing under. They all had stories. Now, I had my story. I had a couple of stories, this and the stairway collapse and a few others. But everybody, every firehouse, and I'm saying, I got a subject here. I can't understand how this has not been written about. And I remember when I was going to school with my my mentor, my role model, Lou Harris, there was a rescue guy died in a loft building, collapsed down. And I was up in Harlem, but he died in a loft building down Lower Manhattan. And I remember asking the chief, we were in a class, we said, hey, Chief, Cap, what was the reason for that? And he says, many times we don't get the reason. I think I asked Charlie Walsh, the division commander of the 3rd Division, too. I said, Chief, what was the cause of it? And he says, many times we really don't have there may not be a single cause, or we don't, and they didn't do investigations. Mm-hmm. We did not have NIOSH. God bless NIOSH. If you had a collapse and everybody was so emotionally distraught with anger or sadness or guilt, nobody wanted to sit down and talk about it. There was no investigations.
Yeah.
So until 1994, when NIOSH came out, and of course, this 23rd Street collapse, because of 12 deaths, we had a major investigation. And I got the investigation right in my table here. I've been reading it. It was a great, big investigation by the building department, by the fire department, by the mayor's office. So this was thoroughly investigated because it was such a horrendous number of firefighters at the time. But 12 years later, it really came out on me. And again, I did not know it was this fire. I just said, I just interested in a subject of collapse. And because I saw everybody had stories about it, I had my stories about it. And that's how that book came out. And I hit that subject, which, here we were in 100 years in the fire in FDNY, and nobody ever really thoroughly sat down and started talking about how buildings collapse. So I had the first, and I got a wave of the war years. So I was very fortunate, and so that had great impact on me. But I didn't know it, and I remember later on in the 80s, after I wrote my book, the concept of stress debriefing and counseling service after a fire just came about around the 1980s. That was a hot subject, where after a bad fire, firefighters would sit and talk to a counselor. That was all new. We never did that. And I remember I was talking to some firefighters, and they said, probably if we had counseling, I might not have written that book, Collapse of Burning Building. I might have gone to a counselor and talked about this fire and gotten it out of my system, although I don't think so. And maybe saying, well, I don't really have this, subconscious desire to write about collapse, but I think I would have done it anyway. But so this was my defining fire, I would have to say, in my life, and I was very lucky that I was able to write about it. And then, of course, when you start to read about counseling and stress debriefing, that and in the 90s they came out with critical after the Vietnam War, critical stress and stress debriefing. Then I realized, I was debriefing my stress by writing. Then I realized, hey, that's what I'm doing here. This is critical stress debriefing by me writing this. I didn't understand that.
It was your therapy.
And then what?
It was your therapy.
It was my therapy. And then, like somebody, I read somewhere, that's called exorcising your demons. I guess I had a demon in there and I was getting it out. I didn't understand that. But so many times we do things and you don't understand what's motivating you to do things. So I'm sure it was, that's what it was. I was debriefing, the stress in there, and I was exercising my demons. But it also had great benefit to the fire service. That book is a classic, and never thinking that. And I remember one guy wrote a book. I was a fire officer, and so I wrote this book. It took me about a year. It took me 8 years to write Collapse of Burning Buildings. Wow. I would have to say it started in 1978. Actually, yeah. when I wrote my first WNYF article. And I didn't get that manuscript until 1988. And the book was published in 88. I had the manuscript 2 years earlier, but that book took me 8 years to write. And of course, the way I wrote it was I was writing for Firehouse magazine, and it was almost, I could not ever sit down and write a book. What I had to do there, I wrote every 2 months, I had to present an article for Firehouse. And I would say, I actually had a table of content, of where I was going in this book. And I followed that table of content, wall collapse, ceiling collapse, floor collapse, stairway collapse, hallway collapse. And I just would write those articles for Firehouse, and knowing that was a chapter in the book. So I remember I had maybe 2 more chapters to write, and I, same thing, why don't I just sit down and write those 2 chapters? No, I had to do it Firehouse article by Firehouse article. I mean, that's how somehow you have to, organize your world and your life. So that's how I wrote it. It took me 8 years writing these articles in Firehouse. Every once in a while, I'd divert and write about something else, but mainly they were all chapters in the book Collapse of Burning Buildings.
It's fascinating to hear you say that. I mean, the collapse of burning buildings is a staple in the fire service. I mean, it's on every promotional test.
Yeah.
Every firefighter should read it, should become familiar with that book and understand how construction and these buildings are built, and how the fire and impacts the way that the building is constructed, and how that leads to a collapse. Chief, so bring us back to that night, that fateful night for those 12 firefighters on October 17th, 1966. Tell us about your night. Where were you? Where were you that night? What were you assigned to? And ultimately, where were you when the floor gave out? Give us a little insight.
Okay. There's almost two parts of that question. One is what I did, and the other one is like what happened to Riley after I left him. But let's stick with my assignment. Box came in and on 9:36. I was just looking at 9:36. Box comes in. We're on the second alarm, 33 engine. So the second alarm comes in 10:09. So we respond. I responded. So the fire's on 22nd Street. It's a brownstone building. You can see it on the right-hand side of that picture. It's a 4-story, what we call a brownstone, with a cellar entrance underneath the stoop. So I report to this Harry Goebbels, assistant chief. I'm shocked to see an assistant chief at this fire. So it is in the 3rd division. Now I'm in the 1st division. So I report into Chief Goebbels. He says, stand fast. So I'm looking at this brownstone, and Rescue 1's got a 2.5-inch line, and heavy fires coming out of underneath the stoop, and they're not going down there. I mean, heavy stuff. And then, I'm at the command post with the chief watching. Nothing's happening here. So ready for an order. And then Goebbels says to me, 33 engine, bring your men around to 23rd Street. Chief Riley's around there. We think these buildings are interconnected. So myself and the guys run around to the 23rd Street, just opposite this. So there's a deputy chief, Thomas Riley, 3rd Division, standing in front of this drugstore here. It is the real big building. There's 3 buildings here. It's a drugstore, Fans Lingerie, dress shop, and a Barton's candy store. So he's standing in front of the Winter drugstore. I report in, 33 engine, chief. He says, 33, stand fast. I'm on his right side. And then I see a fellow I knew, Joe Priori. He's covering in my firehouse there. So I see Joe come up with 18 engine. Riley says, stand fast there. So I'm looking in the drugstore, the light's lit. There's a list of whispers, hot light smoke. I said to one of the firefighters, we should get around the other way. There's all action. all fires around there, nothing here. So the lights on. So all of a sudden, a fire patrolman comes out of the drugstore, an old grizzly fire patrolman guy. These are insurance men who throw covers, and they only responded to these commercial buildings. So this fire patrol fireman comes out. He says, Chief, we got smoke around the baseboards in the drugstore. So now we still haven't located this fire. Heavy fire on 22nd. This fire patrolman tells Riley, smoke coming up around the baseboards in the back of the drugstore. So Riley says, can you hear me? Yeah. Riley says to 33, get a line on exposure 2, 18-inch and get a line in the drugstore. So now I'm going to stick with myself and leave Riley. So we get a 2.5-inch line somehow, and we hook up with this Freddie White. He's the 6th Battalion, grizzly old veteran fire chief in the 6th Battalion. Freddie White said, 33, get that 2.5 line, follow me. He brings us up to a building on Broadway that is between the two buildings on 22nd Street and 23rd Street. He brings us into this bathroom that's in a hallway of this commercial building on the 2nd floor. We forced the bathroom door, locked door open. So now there's a frosted glass window in this bathroom. And, he said, well, we're going to break this window. And I think Freddie White knew if there was any fire between these two buildings in his backyard, we were going to hit it. He knew, this old chief knew it. So before we could break the window, some guy yells up the stairway, everybody out of the building, evacuate, get out of the building, withdraw from the building. Now I thought I saw a flash behind that frosted glass bathroom window. I thought I heard a whoosh. I don't know. Anyway, so we back out. We're out of the building. The word is everybody out of the building. Now I'm in that building I'm in that building here where the hose stream from the street is going in there. So we back out. Now go back to 23rd Street, and Alan Hay is there. Alan Hay is the 1st Division deputy. He's buffing this fire, basically. So Hay says to me, Lieutenant, get that 2.5-inch line. We're going into Faye's lingerie shop. He thinks if we can get to the back of Faye, the collapse must have happened. So now he thinks if we can get to the back of the store, the middle store, Faye's lingerie, we can maybe get to the fire or whatever. I don't know what he wanted to do, but we were in the 3 store, the drugstore, Faye's lingerie, and Barton's candy store. We were in the middle store, Faye's lingerie. We go back there. Now, there's heavy smoke coming from where, I don't know. But I remember we opened up the line, and I remember this terrazzo floor. The terrazzo floor in front of us, in front of me, was chunking, falling into the basement. The beams had burned away the drugstore, and on top of the beams, you had terrazzo, which is, they said 5 inches of concrete, and there's like a fancy marble chip that they polished the top of it. It's a very fancy looking floor, a terrazzo floor. But I'm watching this floor in front of me cave in like ice. If you're on an ice, thick ice in a lake, and the ice is caving in, that's how this terrazzo was crumbling. A big 3x3 chunk would drop into the cellar, and you could see water. The water was right below the beams. So the cellar was filled with water. If you fell in the basement, you were never going to be found. You were going to drown down there. So, we backed out of there. He said, come on, back out. The way this floor collapsed, there was no lean to, there was nothing. It would chunk off like a thick ice collapsing into a lake. That's how it was. So it was scary. And you could see there was water down there. So anyway, we backed out. And by that time, it was an outside operation. They were trying to figure out who died. Now, let's go back to Riley. Now, Ann asked me a question. Ann Neville asked me a question. when that floor collapsed in the Wonder Drugstore, were there people in the store? And yes, Hay was in the exposure store, and he was trying to locate the fire in the lingerie store. We had firefighters up above the Wonder Drugstore searching the floors above, looking for this fire. Nobody had really pinpointed where this fire was. So anyway, so I left Riley. After Riley says 33 get a line in exposure to, he said to Joe Prairie, 18 get a line in the drugstore. Now I left. So what happened was, before I got there, Riley got there much before, and he knows he's got to sell a fire on 22nd Street. So now I'm assuming he says, "Oh, I must have better check the cellar on 23rd Street," because there was an alarm going off indicating the smoke was going into this building on 23rd Street. So he sends 5 engine and 3 truck down to the basement of the Wonder Drugstore. The only interior access to this cellar is an interior wooden stair inside the drugstore. Now, when you look at this investigation report, there's a picture of an outside sidewalk cellar entrance, but that cellar entrance did not go down anywhere. I always question. They said specifically the only access to this cellar was a wooden interior stair right inside to the left of the Wonder Drugstore. There's a picture of an outside cellar, but that did not lead down. And maybe it was blocked, but it was not an access to the cellar. All right, so Riley goes into the building on 23rd Street where you have it there. Can I use it? Can you see that, Bill?
Yep.
Yeah. So there's the stairway that goes down there. Now the drugstore was 100 feet. Now, when they go down to the basement, they only have 65 feet of basement. They don't know. They see a new cinder block wall here. So that 5 engine, 3 truck come down to this brand new cinder block wall, pull the ceiling here, and they say, they run back and say, "Chief, we got no fire." There's a battalion chief down there with them. So he radios to Riley. We got very little fire down there. They said they smelled gasoline. There was drums of liquor, lacquer, and varnish and paint in this frame refinishing building here. And this is where the fire was burning. So 5 engine and 3 truck are down there. Now, Riley walks in here, 18 engine stretches a hose line to the back of his drugstore, around the baseboards where that fire patrolman says the fire is. And they're looking around, the smoke coming up there. Now, when 5 engine and 3 truck, can you show that prior? Yeah, when 5 engine and 3 truck go down there, they pull the ceiling, nothing's going on. When they go down here, 5 engine leaves his firefighter Cicero at the top of the stairs here. And he says, "Get these boxes off the stair in case we got to make a quick escape. And you stay here and warn if anything happens up here." That was a great move. So there's a fireman up here from 5 engine Cicero, is his name, Nick Cicero. So now when Riley walks back here with 18 engine back here, and 7th Battalion is back there, 7 truck is back there, the terrazzo floor chunks off, collapses in one big piece, and they all fall into the fire. 10 of them fall into the fire.
Wow.
The 2 drivers, McCarran and Rudy Kaminsky, I came in the job with, they're trying to get out of here. And when the floor collapses, a big ball of fire comes blowing out here, and it traps them. Kaminsky and McCarran are killed on the first floor. Now this guy Cicero, he when this floor comes down, the air gushes in, and the big smoke and heat comes blowing out. Cicero yells down, get out, something's wrong. So now 5 engine and 3 truck are down there, and now they got to get out. They got to come up to the first floor and get out the door. And nobody wants to go past this fire. The fire is blowing out the door. So this guy, Royal Fox, a lieutenant, 3 truck, he was trapped in a building down on Broadway where 3 guys died. And he says, "You got to go, guys. You got to get out of here." So there was so much fire up here, they were reluctant. He pushes them out. They roll out here, 8 of them. They roll out, burned, smoking on the street, and we could have 20 dead if Royal Facts didn't push them out. Now, these 8 guys rolling out here, Chief Hayes sees them and he thinks, well, maybe we got everybody out. He didn't know they were from the basement, and there were 12 other more guys who didn't come out. So now there's a little delay in who's missing. We don't have the chiefs have handy talking. So now accountability was very new then. So now we have to say, did anybody see Riley? A big assistant chief comes around to me. Did you see Riley? I said, yeah, I saw Chief Riley. I reported to him, and when? 10 o'clock. So now it takes them a while to get these names together. So slowly but surely, we realized that the gravity of this collapse. They built for 5 missing, 7 missing, 10 missing, 12 missing. So that was it. If you look at the plaque, if you look at that plaque outside the building, I like to say we lost 2 chiefs, we lost 2 company officers, we lost 2 chiefs drivers, and we lost 6, firefighters in that plaque. And so here you go, Riley, Higgins, Finley, Jack Finley, 7 truck, Joe Priori, McCarran, these were the 2 drivers, Kelly, Tepper, Danny Ray, Kaminsky, Lee, and Berry. Now, let me tell you something about this plaque. This was 66. And after things calmed down, we enter the 70s. And when we finally get our act together, I want to put this plaque. There's a new building there. And the new building didn't like the fire department. Said, no, we're not letting you put that plaque on our building. We refuse. You cannot make us put that plaque on the building. So they put it in the sidewalk. So this plaque was on the sidewalk of 23rd Street, outside where the building was, for about 10 years. Dogs used to piss on it, on the building. Nobody liked the firemen. In the war years, they used to, so I like to say this because to remind all they called soldiers baby killers. They called cops pigs, and they threw bottles and rocks at firemen, and they wouldn't put that plaque on the building. They despised the uniform people so much in that period of the 70s. So anyway, I like to say that they refused to put it on a building. And then there was a new owner, he relented, and we finally got that plaque on the building. Wow. So that was what I know about that fire. Mm-hmm. And again, I put it out of my mind. That's the way you do it in the fire service. And you try to move on with life. And I did. I felt very good. I was a young kid. I was 31. And actually, my wife was pregnant with my son. And this article, this picture you got behind you, was it from the New York Times. And this girl writes this. I can't think of her name. But my son read this article. And he said to me, I wasn't born then. He was born in April of 67. Mm-hmm. So, and he says, I would never have known you, if you were killed at that collapse. I mean, that was an interesting observation. Yeah. I didn't even know that. He told me about that. But so my wife was pregnant with my son, and my daughter was about 2 or 3 years old. And but had I died, that would have been. It would have been all right. So that basically that was it. I mean, it's
it's interesting because I know you mentioned this. You talked about this in your book, My War Years, and you touched on that exact point of the assignments that night, and had it been your engine company assigned to locate the fire and to go in and in the same entrance as the men that perished that night. There would have been so many different things, that had happened. Not only your family would have suffered a great loss, the fire service, as we know it today, would have suffered a great loss. We wouldn't have the great Chief Vinnie Dunn writing about the collapse of burning buildings. And listen, Chief, I know it's, first and foremost, your family comes first. We've talked about that,
yeah.
But secondly, think of the countless number of lives that have probably been saved due to the education and the knowledge and the information they gained by reading your book, The Collapse of Burning Buildings, which ultimately was, kind of started because of this fire. I mean, you mentioned this is the defining moment of your career, the defining fire of your career. And it's I don't want to say it's fascinating. I think fascinating is the wrong word to use, but it's just it's an odd it's an odd take on it. It's something that in the grand scheme of things, I'm a firm believer of this. Everything happens for a reason. And had it been you that night, things would not be the same in the fire service today.
Well, let me tell you, that's a very interesting point. I didn't think about that until about 10 years later. And one of the firefighters, Eddie Butler, said to me, did you ever think about what if Riley reversed those orders? And I never did. And then after he told me that, I said, God, that would have been, I just don't think like that. But there's one of the firefighters said, he says, Vin, what if Riley had said, 33, get the line? Because I was there first, and 18, get the line. And although I guess we were on the side of exposure too. But so let me tell you about that. So if he had reversed the orders. So one day, now I'm in the 3rd division I'm in Riley's position. I'm the division commander of the 3rd division, which was Riley's assignment.
Mm-hmm.
I replaced him for 15 years in the 3rd division. So here I am in Riley's position here. But so we have a wonderful chaplain, Julian Deacon is his name. And when I got assigned to the 3rd division from the Bronx, I said, geez, I don't know if I want to be in a firehouse with a chaplain. I said, I think that would be very inhibiting, but you got a priest in there, Franciscan priest. So I go down to the 3rd division. This is 1984. I go from the Bronx and this guy's a gem. He's just a sweetheart of a guy. One of the firemen, guys ignore him. The language is like he never existed, And even one time I said, do you mind, when we don't pay him respect? He says, actually, I don't like, there's some people when they see a priest, they become too reverent, they become overly reverent. He said, that gets me upset. He was just a regular guy. And he was a chaplain that not only did family home visits, not only did ceremonies, he would respond to the Bronx. I got to know him in the Bronx, because he would shoot up there every time we had a multiple alarm fire. He loved firefighting. He was a buff. So Jules was a responding chaplain. I've got pictures of him in my book, with some firefighter in the street, administering to him. But Jules, we call him Jules. Reverend Julian Deacon was his name. But everybody called, hey, Jules, how you doing? So he hung out in the firehouse quite a bit. But anyway, one night, I'm talking to Jules, and now I know. My buddy has told me, what if Riley reversed the orders? So I said to Jules, one night we're up in the office. I'm not doing confession or anything. I'm saying, I said, Jules, I said, you think God looked down that night and saw Riley and Joe Priori to the left and me with 33 on the right? And God said, I'm going to let that fire lieutenant die and let that fire lieutenant live because he's going to write a book on building collapse. And Jules got angry. He said, God would never let never let a fireman die. And I said, that was a great answer to a stupid question, So I was shocked at how angry. God would never let a fire lieutenant die. He jumped on me. So I said, okay, that was just a stupid question. But then, so that was one of the firemen in that picture with Eddie Butler, so who became a big chief too. But then I start to look at if we had gone into the drugstore and I died, or maybe Joe Priori would have written the book, who knows? But if I died, then I had Eddie Butler was a fireman in that company that night. He became the Manhattan Borough commander. He would have. There was another fireman, Frank Lombardi. He became a division commander in Brooklyn. And then there was a Gabe Abernathy. He became a battalion commander. So I had 3 big command chiefs, working as firefighters. So, who had impact in the fire service later on. So it was just ironic. And, you think about things. It just shows you how things go. But so that was it. And Eddie Butler said, what if he did reverse those orders? And I never thought about it, but now I can't stop thinking about it. And we're talking about it here.
You mentioned something earlier, Chief, that I wanted to touch on. You had mentioned the handy-talkie radios, and I know that they were kind of new at the time, right? They were present there, but you didn't have a lot of them, right? There wasn't a lot of handy-talkie radios or walkie-talkies or portable radios on scene. So what factor do you feel communication limitations had on that fire? If there was more or better communication, either from the walkie-talkies or from the the structure of the command at that fire, do you feel that this fire might have gone in a different direction?
No question about it. I did not have a handy-talkie. Chiefs had radios. Company officers didn't get radios until the 70s. But I did not have a radio. No, Chief says go around, check the rear of the building. You had to run around, check it, and then run back, tell the chief. I mean, those guys, when they went down the basement and they saw things weren't bad, I think the chief was down there. So he would radio. Only chiefs, deputies, and battalion had these big, heavy, and their drivers had these heavy handy-talkie radios. But there was no communications down there. Mm-hmm. So that was definitely a factor, in locating this fire. But truthfully, this was on two street fronts of moving a wall in the basement. That was highly, highly unusual. And another factor that came out of there, they had a bomb in that basement. They had drums of lacquer, varnish, paint down there, no sprinklers. You can't, that was the big element there. When you evaluate fire load, you got to evaluate the type of structure and the content. And actually content changes. You say, well, the building construction never changes. We know what a wood heavy timber is going to give us. We know what a wood type 5 frame is going to give us. We know what a brick and joist is going to give us. We know what a fire resistant building is going to give us. But we don't know the content in there. It can be non-hazardous, and then all of a sudden they move in drums of varnish and lacquer. You say liquor, or varnish and lacquer. I mean, that's a bomb. So the content changes. So that's the big problem when you're determining fire load of fuel load of a structure. When you're doing pre-planning, check the content. We had a bomb down there with wood frame, dried out wood, painted wood. We had drums of paint, drums of lacquer, varnish. It was terrible what they had in that basement, and no one was going to put that fire out, And so then one of the things they recommended when you have high hazard in the basement, if it's over 1,000 square feet, you got to have automatic sprinklers. Yeah. You got to know what the content of the cellar is, and then you got to order some sprinklers.
I know there were evacuation orders after the floor had collapsed. Was there ever a mayday given, and who ordered the evacuations?
We didn't have the mayday signal then. There was no mayday signal. That came later. But it was like, I don't think they said when the floor collapsed. When the floor collapsed, Cicero, fireman Nick Cicero, told everybody, get out, something's wrong. That guy gave the order to evacuate. Wow. And they said a big a ball of fire came out of the building on 22nd Street. Because when you compressed that cellar room, the big ball of fire rolled out the first floor of the drugstore and pushed out, down the hallway out the front door of 22nd Street. So they gave an order on 22nd Street, Goebbels, to get out of that building. And then Nick Cicero gave the order, and the chief was gone. Riley couldn't give it. And the Higgins was the 7th Battalion. He couldn't give it. But fortunately, Al Hay, the division chief in the 1st, was buffing that fire. So Hay gave, he saw, he was trying to make a roll call of the guys who rolled out. And And then when we still went back in, I mean, we had guys upstairs, and Hay took us back into that phase lingerie, trying to get to the rear. So we didn't really evacuate after that. We were trying to get to those guys. So, but then when we saw the way the terrazzo was chunking down into a flooded, water-filled cellar, and there was no, those beams were 3 by 14 wooden beams. They all burned away.
Wow.
And that, so there was no floor there. So after somebody gave us the order to move out of that building on Broadway, we still went back in with Chief Hay, trying to get to Riley and those guys. And then he realized he would lose more people. And so he backed us out. But even then, that guy, John Donovan, came off hydrant inspection from 18 engine. So he goes to the fire and he's told the men are missing. So, they give him the 2.5-inch nozzle, try to go into the drugstore. He goes in, falls in the hole, holds onto the hose, and the guys pull him out. So we were still trying to get to the, we were never really fully evacuated out of that building, in one. We didn't have any Mayday signal. We didn't have any See, we don't do that. That's my big bugaboo in the fire service. We don't have an exit strategy. We don't, I think a lot of departments, I know in Long Island, when they want to evacuate a building, they hit those air horns continuously.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody hears those air horns. Maybe in a big high rise, you can't use that. What we do now have a tone on our handy talkies that starts to blare, and that's their evacuation. But we didn't have it in 66.
Yeah. There's been several unfortunate incidents and deadly fires in the history of FDNY. The obvious is the World Trade Center collapse. You had Black Sunday and the 23rd Street fire, which I believe is the second deadliest fire in FDNY history. What are some of the similarities that you see, or that you see between these two events?
That was Ann Neville brought that up, and I squashed it. But the similarity between the similarity between 23rd Street and the Black Sunday, where the guys jumped out the window, was they were changing walls. They were moving walls. Illegal alterations was the similarity between that fire and the Father's Day fire. Was an explosion. There was no explosion here. But I really can't talk about 911. I mean, that was out of my realm.
Mm-hmm.
Jay Jonas is a friend of mine. He was the deputy in the 7th. He's the fellow that can talk about 911. I really have no ability to speak about that fire.
Sure.
That was so tragic. I'd rather not say anything about it.
Yeah, that's no problem. You've said that the cause of a tragedy is usually an old lesson that we have not learned, or maybe we've forgotten along the way. So what are some of the lessons that we need to learn to remember from the 23rd Street fire?
Well, the biggest lesson, locate. We don't really give that part of strategy much credit. We have to locate a fire. I remember there was a question on a 1955 lieutenant's test. What do you do when you arrive at a large fire? The A was save lives, B, stretch a hose line, C was start venting, and D was locate the fire. And the answer was locate the fire. And everybody else picked all those other ones. You can't, until you locate the fire, you can't decide where to stretch hose line. Until you locate the fire, you can't decide where your real life hazard is. Until you locate the fire, you can't determine what resources you need. You have to locate the fire. So that's the number one lesson we learned. And it was so difficult. I'm not criticizing because of the 2 street fronts, because of the move in that wall, illegal alteration. And that was why we could not locate that fire. But that's the number one thing there. I thought that was the most important lesson. And then another big lesson here was coordination between the building department and the fire department. They were moving walls and they didn't tell us. After this fire, we realized, hey, we need the building department to tell us all these major alterations. So now we have what we call majorts. It's little words from major alteration. When a big alteration occurs, the building department has to send a notice to the fire department, and then comes down to a deputy. A deputy has to go out there, and we have to inspect the building. So better coordination between building department and fire department. That's another lesson learned here. So that building department coordinate, and then of course inspection benefit. Familiarization with the buildings. That's a big benefit of inspection. Nobody likes building inspections, and the other thing was, when we used to do building inspection, we used to be looking for rubbish violations, doors not closing properly, which is still very important. Doors not closing properly, but we didn't really look at the inspection as a way to increase safety or for complete planning. We now do inspections and say, let's do this inspection for pre-planning, not only for the fire violations. So we become familiar with the buildings, and we do pre-planning based on some of our inspections. And the big thing is, Riley's son kept asking me, don't you guys know how to delegate? What was my father? I don't mean to laugh, believe me. What was my father doing in with that nozzle man? How come he wasn't out at the command post? Don't you teach, command position? Well, back in 66, rather than 1960, we didn't have that. We didn't have Alan Brunacini's incident command system. Today we have positions for chiefs, and we have names. We have operations chief, command chief, logistics chief, planning chief. So we have better coordination of our command structure. We didn't have standardized command structure positioning then. But I kept saying, no, we do understand delegation, and we do send in an operations chief. And as a deputy chief, 50 years later, most of the time I was outside, and that was my position. When the battalion chief came, or when I responded and the battalion chief was there, he gave me a rundown. I'd say, you're inside, you're the operations chief. I'm taking command. And I would operate like that. I rarely would be in the building. Well, one night, the same thing happened to me. I had a vacant building in the Bronx, and I didn't know the battalion chief. And I didn't have any relationship with this fella. He was covering one night, and we didn't locate the fire. We have all hands in, and we hadn't located the fire yet. So now I'm saying, Jesus, where's this fire? And I'm asking the battalion. He don't know where the fire is located. So now I said, I'm going to have to do something. So now I tell the driver, I'm going back. I go to the rear of the building, and I'm going to locate the fire. So there's 3 steps in a doorway in the back. So I run up. I want to take a peek in the building, see if I can see something. So I'm running up the steps on here, and fireman, chief. I said, what the hell are they talking about? Then all of a sudden I start to float in the air. There's no floor at the top of the stairway, and I'm going down this hole. And now I try to grab on my left hand, a nail goes right through my left hand, and then my right leg is pulled up under me and snaps my knee, and I grab on to the other end of the opening, and I keep from falling into the basement, like some other firefighter I knew. So I pull myself up out of there, and I limp out to the front of the command post where I should have stayed, and I see this fella, Joe Sazzone, is out there. I know him. And I got pain in my knee, my hand is killing me. I said, Joe, and I said to my driver, transmitted third alarm. And I said to Joe, I'm going down. I fall in the street, in a puddle of runoff water. So I wake up, I'm in the ambulance, a redheaded guy with a beard is holding my hand. He says, Chief, you're going to be okay. So there was one, I was like Riley. There was some relation here. I was like Riley that night. I hadn't located the fire. So now I ran in trying to locate this fire. And then I almost got killed. It wasn't as serious as that, but I left the hospital at midnight with a bandaged hand, a bandaged knee, a tetanus shot in my butt, and a cane. So then I said, when Riley's son was asking about what was my father doing in there, I said, look, we rarely go in there as a deputy chief. But to locate the fire, if you ever had a fire so long and you haven't located the fire, everybody is saying, where is this fire? And that's what pulled Chief Riley into that building to die. But we now have our command positions, and we don't. Rarely does a deputy chief go in, but the son, the military man, CEO, he was really angry. What are you? Don't you guys have delegation? Don't you understand delegation of authority? I said we do. I forget his name, and I was apologizing. I said we rarely go in, but when we don't locate the fire, everybody, including the deputy, gets excited and tries to go in, but we shouldn't. Like Alan Brunacini said, we should be outside. We should have to stay out there. The deputy stays out there, and you assign an operations chief. You got enough confidence in your operations chief, you never go in there. That night with me, I didn't know the battalion chief. I was operating. I don't know what the relationship between Riley and Higgins. Not that was a fact. I wouldn't even go there. But when you work with a battalion chief many years, you'll never go into that building.
Yeah.
Rely so much on the battalion chief or the operations chief, as they call him now.
This fire happened so long ago now, and it's always been said that the fire service is reactive instead of proactive. We always react to tragedy. Different things come out of tragedies, and policies and procedures and strategy and tactics come out of different tragedies, unfortunately. And it's important because there's a lot of things here in this fire that we talked about that seem to have come out of this fire. Communications, the accountability system, like you talked about, the importance of pre-planning and building familiarization, the importance of inspections, the importance of post-fire analysis, right? Fire investigation. You had mentioned that the investigation of this fire didn't really happen until well after the fire, had passed.
It was a good investigation, but it took months. It was really done well. They interviewed everybody. I was down there and being interviewed. It was a very good investigation, 30 pages. I've got it here. But it was really the beginning of post-fire analysis. And now we do them, but NIOSH is better. I like to give credit to NIOSH, because they're independent. They're not, biased. They don't have any favorites, and you can expect an objective investigation.
Yeah. Chief, a lot of things could have changed that night. A lot of things we talked about had a major impact on your career. It's a tragedy. I want to dedicate this episode to those 12 men that lost their lives that night, and gave something for everyone else that survived and for everyone else in the fire service. So many of us can learn valuable lessons from this fire, from studying this fire. And, unfortunately, they gave the ultimate sacrifice that night, but their ultimate sacrifice ultimately has saved, thousands of lives, because it just showed the importance of so many different things from a firefighting standpoint. So, Chief, I really appreciate you spending the time tonight to talk about this fire, to talk about your experience there, and to give us some education and some insight. And hopefully somebody watching this video, listening to this podcast, takes the time to really go back to that investigation, go back to that report, to study this fire, and hopefully we can continue to save more lives. So I really do appreciate you sitting down and chatting about it.
Great question. Thank you, Bill. I enjoyed it myself. Have a good night.
All right, you too. Thank you.